And so I will pass it on to Al Mitty, who is a chapter co-coordinator of the World Beyond War Illinois chapter, which is hosting today's event. And Al will officially kick us off. So go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Greta, for that and for all your help on this. Thanks also to all of you who are joining us from all over the world. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you may be in. Thanks especially, though, to our participants and to our presenters who represent various peace movements, especially in Finland, and they are experts in their given fields there. And I think all of you as participants are going to find this to be very informative and we hope thought-provoking. I'm going to do a couple of little things here, a pitch for our chapter. I hope if I can do the screen share correctly. Is that showing up?
Yes, it is. Thank you. You could put it
Okay.
into full screen.
There we go. Okay, so this is the event that you are participating in. A little plug for our chapter, our World Beyond War chapter. We are a group of individuals advocating for the prevention of all wars and the ending of all existing wars. And we have three kind of areas of focus. First is education, then advocacy, and then monitoring of media. We have memberships available to those of you who are in Illinois. We'd love to have you join us in this effort. So you can go to this link here. I'll put it in the chat at some time, or you can contact me in the chat and we will be in touch with you about joining our chapter. I would encourage all of you to consider, if you haven't done so, consider signing this peace pledge, which you can find at the World Beyond War website. And I'm going to read this very briefly. I understand that wars and militarism make us less safe rather than protect us, that they kill, injure, and traumatize adults, children, and infants, severely damage the natural environment, erode civil liberties, and drain our economies, siphoning resources from life-affirming activities. I commit to engage in and support nonviolent efforts to end all war and preparations for war and to create a sustainable and just peace. This map is intended, it was on the promotional material, but it shows you how close Finland is. As the materials showed, there is a 1,340 kilometer border between Russia and Finland. And you can see there how close St. Petersburg and other cities in Russia are to Finland. And this bigger map of the kind of Baltic area shows you a lot of the cities that are in Finland and with the border with Russia. So that was a little effort there at some geography for those of you who aren't familiar with this beautiful part of the world. So with that, I will stop share. And I now have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker. So our first speaker is Liisa Taskinen. Liisa will speak on the defense cooperation agreement that is between Finland and Russia, and between Finland and the United States, sorry. And we'll give a little bit of history about the relationship between the two countries. Liisa is a retired medical physician. She worked mostly in primary health care. She did research in St. Petersburg, Russia. Her earliest demonstration was against the war on Vietnam back in 1969. She's been involved in a lot of solidarity and anti-apartheid work in the 1980s with the Finnish Peace Committee, worked in Angola with the Namibian Health and Education Center, there, wrote a book about that experience, and came back to Europe. Since 2023, she's been very active in the Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, which has given new networks like World and given presentations like this and this webinar. So Liisa, thank you, and it's yours.
Okay, thank you, and hello to everybody. So about Finland and Russia, the geography cannot be changed. Almost 1,000 years ago, an expansionist states developed in Sweden and in the present-day northern Russia. Swedish and Russian troops fought numerous wars against each other on our territory, or used Finland as a transit area. Finland was then a part of Sweden. And Peter the Great of Russia founded the city of St. Petersburg in 1703 as a window to Europe and to access the sea, and made it a new capital of Russia. Peace treaty, according to which the border between them always ran across the Finnish territory. And as a result of the Napoleonic Wars, Finland became part of the Russian Empire. Okay, and here will be a map about all peace treaties since 1323. And the border, black is Russian area, and white is the Swedish and then Finnish area. So, as a result of this Napoleonic Wars, Finland became part of the Russian Empire in 1809. Independence ideas were born in the last decades of the 19th century, and independence was realized in December 1917, immediately after the Russian October Socialist Revolution. The new independent state had close relations with Germany. The labor movement had been defeated in the Civil War in 1918. And now the Soviet Union was our eastern neighbor. And the big city now called Leningrad was very close, about only 30 kilometers from the border. In the late 1930s, a new war began to look likely due to Germany's desire for expansion. Stalin wanted to protect Leningrad and negotiated to move our border further away and give some territories elsewhere. Because Finland didn't accept the proposal, Stalin's troops attacked Finland, and the Winter War 1939-40 began. As a result, Finland lost its territories in the peace treaty. In 1941, Germany was preparing to attack the Soviet Union, and Finland allied with it to regain the lands it had lost in the Winter War, and even more. About 200,000 German soldiers came to northern Finland by June 41. And then Finland invaded across the new border and then across the old border. But the result was not the desired one. The result was they wanted to be great, create a greater Finland. Finland lost territories and lost nearly 100,000 young men. After the war, it was time for reassessment. In his deliberations, the then President Paasikivi came to the conclusion that whoever or what kind of government is in power in Russia, Finland must come to terms with it, and there must be no threat to Russia from Finnish territory. So in 1948, the two countries signed a treaty, a friendship, cooperation, and mutual assistance. Finland chose political neutrality, military non-alignment, and friendly relations with all neighboring countries as a new foreign and security policy, and it was favored by the majority of the people. Russia's invasion of Ukraine eventually changed the public opinion over one night. The attack was a shock and brought to the surface memories of the Winter War and the fear that Finland will be the next one. This state of shock was exploited, and without the promised referendum, the parliament decided to apply for NATO membership, which was approved in April 2023. The next step in tying Finland firmly to the US lease is the defense cooperation agreement between the two countries, which was approved by the Finnish parliament last summer. The agreement is based on a US model agreement to which only minor locally necessary changes have been made. The agreement is made entirely from the perspective of the United States. The US Armed Forces will have 15 bases around the country in connection with the existing Finnish garrisons. These bases comply with US laws, and the Finnish authorities have no power over them. Our government has issued a report on the effects of the agreement. Finnish law prohibits bringing nuclear weapons into the country. Based on the agreement, Finland cannot demand information about possible US nuclear weapons in the country. The right to come to our country is based on the agreement itself, and it is unilateral, only concerning the right of US troops to enter Finland. Finland does not even have the right to control contract-related passenger traffic at our borders. We do not know who will cross our borders. And more, the government admits that it has not been possible to quantify the financial impact of the obligations and commitments under the agreement, but they will take shape over the years, and it's taxpayers' money. About environmental impacts, the report briefly states that noise caused by shooting and exercise activities and military aviation is stated. The increase in greenhouse gases and other emissions is estimated to be minor, and there is no justification for this. As far as human rights are concerned, the agreement does not mention the rights of the indigenous Sami people to their land and livelihood. The Sami have been completely excluded from both the drafting of the agreement and the planning of military exercises that have already taken place in the Sami areas in northern Finland and Sweden and Norway as well. The agreement does not take into account that in practice, the USA has almost the rights of an occupying power, and that the United States and its allies could also pose a threat to Finland's sovereignty. Nor does the agreement take account of the fact that increasing US presence near Russia's northwestern border and its important military targets will increase tension on our eastern border and may weaken, not increase, our security. It must be taken into account that Russia rightly feels concerned about the security of its northwestern border, especially St. Petersburg, and feels that Finland is an unfriendly country bound by the DCA Treaty.
Liisa,
Yes,
if I
thanks.
could, oh, okay, I was just gonna,
Thank you so much, Liisa. And I'll turn it to Al to introduce our next speaker. Oh, Al, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Liisa, for that information. Our next speaker is Ulla Klötzer, who is with the Women for Peace in Finland, and she's going to present some information about the recent peace conference that was held in St. Petersburg, Russia. Ulla is active with the Women for Peace and Women Against Nuclear Power, as well as the Global Women for Peace United Against NATO similarly to Liisa. She is actively building up networks around these issues in the Nordic countries, Europe, and elsewhere, and she is engaged in a variety of environmental and sustainable development issues as well. So, Ulla, the floor is yours for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitations to this webinar initiated by Al Mötty and World Beyond War. And in order to come to the issue of why we went to St. Petersburg in September, I want to, show you some maps which are very crucial. Here you see, as Al already showed, the Baltic Sea. And the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries. And the Baltic Sea is one of the world's busiest seaways, with 2,500 civilian vessels per day. It's very shallow and can only be reached by three narrow straits between Denmark and Sweden. And if you look closely, between Poland and Lithuania, you see a small region. That's the Kaliningrad Oblast. And then you see at the end of the Gulf of Finland, St. Petersburg, which means that Russia is very isolated and has only two ways into the Baltic Sea. Next, please. Greta, yes. And here you see the border, which doubled for NATO when Finland became NATO member in April 2023. The border is now 965 kilometers, 830 miles, and 1,300 kilometers. And it's a very, very frightening fact that as NATO members, we could have US nuclear weapons 965 kilometers from Kremlin in Moscow, or 600 miles. Next, please. Here you see, as Liisa already showed, the DCA agreements with the US, bringing 48 Nordic US bases, military bases, to our region. Finland gets 15. I don't think Russia is very happy about this. Next one. Here you see the Baltic area, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and all the NATO troops which are situated there. It's a very heavily militarized area we live in. Next one. Of course, I think that Russia has a right to answer to this militarization of the Baltic. And that was, of course, the oceanic missiles, which were introduced when US made the approval of long-range missile strikes into Russia, which was a really fatal mistake. You can see that the oceanic missile can reach Helsinki in 10 minutes, amongst others. Next one, please. It's not only so that the Baltic Sea has this militarization going on, but we have a military legacy from both world wars with chemical and conventional ammunition in the Baltic Sea. You can see mustard gas and lots of other things. You can get these slides if you are interested in getting to know this situation better. Next one, please. According to the CBNV magazine this autumn, the Baltic Sea is one of the most polluted waters worldwide. It's contaminated by hundreds of thousands of tons of munitions dating back as far as World War I, and hundreds of thousands of mines were laid in this area during the wars. Next one, please. After the World War II, approximately 300 tons of bombs, torpedoes, rockets, mines, depth charges, artillery shells, explosives, propellants, and chemical warfare agents were dumped. And you can see what they look like today when you look at the picture. And remember, the Baltic Sea is very small in comparison with other waters. Next one, please. But we are also, the Baltic Sea is also the most radioactive in the world, with cesium-137. Main cause is the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident, but also Russia's nuclear testing in Novaya Zemlya. And next one, please. But it's not enough. We have also substantial PFAS contamination in the Baltic Sea, and that are so-called a group of forever chemicals, and they pose risks to marine organisms and human health. Next one, please. So that is why we decided to meet in St. Petersburg in September this year. We were only 5 physical persons there from abroad. That was all Finnish people, because it's very hard to travel to Russia today, unfortunately. And we had good organizers. We had, of course, the Russian organizer, Public Council of the southern coast of the Gulf of Finland. I have been cooperating with them since 1991. We had Global Women for Peace, United Against NATO, Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, International Peace Bureau, and World Beyond War. Thank you. And next one. We made a declaration. It was hard because we were meeting online, so to say, but we had it ready the second day. And this declaration has been sent to the governments and parliaments of all the Baltic and Arctic regions, to the UN, to UNESCO, to OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Arctic Council, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the Baltic Marine Environmental Protection Commission, NATO, and of course to the authorities in the Petersburg and Leningrad region. Next one, please. And what did we say? We want an immediate halt to the escalation in Ukraine. We want to stop the weapons deliveries to Ukraine, and parties must work for a permanent peaceful solution, and of course prioritize UN initiatives and so on. And the TPNV treaty should be ratified by the Baltic and Arctic states, and the Arctic and Baltic regions to be made a nuclear weapons-free and demilitarized zones of peace. There has been a lot of suggestions from Olof Palme, Urho Kekkonen, the Finnish president, and Mikhail Gorbachev about the nuclear weapons-free zones. You can get acquainted with them elsewhere. And we want the OSCE to be revived, so to say. That is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, but also US is member there, and a lot of other states. Next one, please. And Russia has to be included in all Helsinki Commission meetings. They have been excluded now, and that is a real big mistake. And the Arctic Council work has to be restored to include Russia. And of course, cooperation between the indigenous people across the Arctic borders. Open borders. Yeah, I could travel by train to St. Petersburg in 3 hours before the Finnish politicians closed the borders. It was a real bad mistake. And we have to move the money from the military to human needs, to common security, to environmental sustainability, and of course to the climate change, to stop the climate change. Next one, please. I know that you now say these are illusions and dreams and we are lunatics believing in all this, but I want to use the words of Mahatma Gandhi, who said that first they ignore you, and they have ignored us for a long time. Then they laugh at you. At the moment they laugh at us, they call us Putin lovers and all sorts of things. Then they fight you. They also do that now because we cannot get anything published in the Finnish media which is pro-Russia or against NATO or against the US military bases. But I hope I can have faith still in Mahatma Gandhi, even if the situation in Finland is totally Russophobic. Then you win. Maybe not me at this high age, but I hope it for my children, my grandchildren, and all the children in the world. And I want to travel to St. Petersburg in 3 hours and to Moscow on the overnight train with my grandchildren. I hope I can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulla, for that great reminder, by the way, that wars don't end. The damage and environmental destruction from war goes on for decades and centuries, and your slides showed us that. So thank you for that. Our next speaker will be Ahti Tolvanen. He is with the Friends Society of Finland, and Ahti will speak about a better way of living. He will talk about pacifism and alternatives to war, and the idea for a 50th anniversary of the Helsinki conference, which we hope will occur next summer of 2025. Ahti is Canadian, but he's born in Finland. He worked as a journalist for Thomson Reuters of Canada and later as a sustainable investment analyst at a major Canadian investment concern. He's now retired with his family in Finland, but still counseling and career planning of foreign students, and is with his former employer at Helsinki University. He's done project work in China and West Africa and for the Council of Europe. He's a Finnish Quaker. He was at the St. Petersburg seminar or conference that Ulla mentioned in her presentation. So Ahti, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Al. I will try to address the 3 topics that I've ended up with: pacifism, alternatives to war, and then talk about the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki conference, which is next year in July and August. Now, my approach to pacifism is from the Quaker perspective. Quakers are considered to be a pacifist influence, although they came into being long before this formal term of pacifism existed. And it was really a necessity of survival because of their emergence during the horrors of a civil war, the English Civil War. The pacifism stems from the founder, George Fox's abhorrence of the carnage of the war, and also his attempts to persuade Oliver Cromwell to cease his rule by the sword. He had numerous consultations with Oliver and was a close friend of his. Oliver Cromwell, as you know, was the Lord Protector of England in the period after the Civil War, as well as his exhortations for a radical religious tolerance extending even to Muslims. Other notable events involving the Quakers include Quakers winning the Nobel Prize for Peace just after the war for their post-war peace-building efforts in Europe, including here in Finland. This was when the Quakers here were founded, actually. They also supported the sailing of the Golden Rule sloop to protest nuclear testing in the Philippines in the 50s. This was a model for the Greenpeace actions later. And then sending medical supplies from the United States to North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, which many of our American listeners might be well aware of. As I said, in Finland, the Quaker community was founded after the Second World War, mainly by American Quakers who volunteered in reconstruction camps, mainly in northern Finland, an area destroyed by the Germans during their retreat. And they donated funds as well to the founding of the Quaker movement, as well as to many projects in the reconstruction. And actually, it was this tradition that inspired me to virtually attend the St. Petersburg meeting on Peace Day last September, and also to being here today. In St. Petersburg, I propose consideration of an NGO event to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Conference in 2025. Probably to be convened in the period July 2nd to August 1st, which was the period when the first Helsinki Conference, which is attributed to being a main event in ending the Cold War, occurred. Although this type of a conference was first proposed by the USSR, the convening in Helsinki was largely the work of US diplomat George West, working with Presidents Gerald Ford and Urho Kekkonen, the president of Finland. And Kissinger favored Geneva as a location because he thought it would be too much, perhaps, sort of pandering to the Russians to have it within their sphere of influence as they saw it here in Helsinki. It was felt that the Helsinki venue would bring it into the Russians' backyard, but that venue was, due to George West's proposal, then selected. Some felt this was solidifying the legitimacy of the Russians as occupiers of Eastern Europe, and a way of compromising NATO. There are similar types of protests now about talking about peace or entering into peaceful negotiations, and also in discussions I've had with the foreign ministry here about doing something regarding the anniversary in 2025 here in this current situation. There's a risk involved, they feel, and there's a similar risk back then, but the outcome proved that the location in Helsinki was justified, and actually in many ways to the benefit of the West and their interests in securing democracy and human rights. The US and Western allies were able to give equal prominence to human rights with security, which was the main concern of the Russian side. This led to a winding down of nuclear arms stockpiles and the Cold War, but also created an agenda for the eventual independence of many Eastern European states, following on founding of citizens' Helsinki committees throughout Eastern Europe. Incidentally, one of the places where there isn't such a committee is here in Finland, but there are still many extant committees, Helsinki committees, that we might work with if we work on developing this idea of having a celebration or an observance or a conference. And eventually the CSC organization was set up to carry out the objectives of security and human rights, and also environmental protection, protection of journalists, protection of environmental, prevention of environmental deterioration, and some of these other things that were in the Helsinki Accords. Despite the Helsinki Accords, NATO expanded its membership and weaponry to over a dozen East European states, most recently, as you know, to Finland and Sweden, contrary to the Helsinki principles. The culmination of this, as we know, was the invasion of the Ukraine by Russia, which is the situation that we are in now. Well, what is the alternative to war? I was asked to address this question. Well, the alternative is diplomacy and a strong peace movement. Every human crisis or issue that we can deal with, think about, including areas of questions of security and regional control and geopolitics, can be solved, can be attempted to be solved through war and aggression, or it can be attempted to be solved through negotiation and diplomacy. But the main problem that the humankind faces right now is the problem of environmental collapse, the climate crisis, and beyond that, loss of biodiversity, loss of species, the food crisis, and so on. These are problems that cannot be solved by war. They can only be made worse. So the solution of war to the main crisis, the main existential crisis that humanity faces right now, does not have an option of being solved by a war or aggression. It can only be solved by negotiation and agreement. And so can that situation in the Ukraine. The situation in the Ukraine can be solved by having a ceasefire and having negotiations. And if there's a concern about whose territory is in the Donbass region belongs to, they can have a referendum there. And they can sit down and decide the terms of that referendum and let the people in that area decide whether they're part of the Russian jurisdiction, Ukraine, or they want to be an independent country. There's no necessity of trying to, it's a futile effort where no one wins to have hundreds of thousands of people killed to determine this geopolitical crisis, which just masks and prevents us from addressing the main problem, which is the environmental crisis. So as I said, the alternative to war, this is my answer, is diplomacy and a strong peace movement. The OSCE has just announced in Malta the other week that the 2025 observance 50th anniversary will be held at the end of next year in Vienna and not in Helsinki. The United States has not, I think, said its final word on this, and this is probably a good time to bring it up because we have a new administration in the United States, and the United States was instrumental in many ways in making provisions and arrangements for the first Helsinki crisis, Helsinki conference, as I mentioned. The Finnish Foreign Minister Montonen has announced that some conferences will be occurring here in Finland, including a conference on anti-Semitism, apparently, and a conference and a couple of other conferences, and NGO participation will be encouraged, and these will be in Helsinki. This seems to create an opportunity for the NGO community of East and West to come to Helsinki and draw attention to the need to mend the main rupture in the Helsinki Accords, the breakdown of relations between Russia and its people and the rest of the other members of the CSCE. That was an existential crisis for humanity at that time, the Cold War and the possibility of a nuclear war breaking out and destroying humanity in effect. And that potential still exists. But we have another crisis, another existential crisis, the environmental crisis, which we're all aware of, I think, in this, well, those of us who are here today.
Ahti,
And
if I could just gently interrupt, if I could just
yes.
urge you to take a minute to just kind of finish up your
Yes,
thought.
thank you. This is what I asked you to do. Thank you for being a stern supervisor of the time. So I propose that we need a conference, and we need a conference not only to address the conflict and the rupture with Russia, but we need a global conference with a theme of the peace and the environment to address the current existential crisis that humanity faces. And an ideal place for this would be here in Helsinki. And this is an opportune moment, a historic moment to seize the opportunity to take such an initiative. The relations need to be amended between Russia and the other CSC members, or everyone's security is in peril. And the nuclear environmental threats will continue to loom larger and larger. And we're all in a deeper crisis unless we succeed in doing this. And I think Helsinki the Helsinki anniversary could offer us an opportunity to seize the moment in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahti, for those remarks. You reminded us that there are always alternatives to war. And the people, when we ask the people, when surveys and so on show that people don't want war, there's always a way to negotiate and to reach understanding. Our next speaker will be Claus Montonen. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Claus is with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, which won the organization won the Nobel Peace Prize, 2 years ago, I believe. Claus was a lecturer in theoretical physics at the University of Helsinki. He's now retired. He's former president of the International Network of Engineers and Scientists for Global Responsibility, and he's very active in this international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. So, Claus, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll start sharing my screen. Yes, we'll shift focus a little bit now from the problems of the Baltic and the Finnish-Russian border, and we'll take a slightly larger and global view, and especially on the question of nuclear disarmament and the danger that nuclear weapons pose to all of us. Ahti here already mentioned that the two existential threats that we are facing right now, the threat of nuclear war and on one hand, and the threat of climate change and environmental disaster on the other hand, they are typically quite different time scales. A nuclear war can end civilization as we know it in a very short time. Climate change will end it if everything runs amok in a century or so. And I would add then a third existential threat, that we are, by indiscriminate use of chemicals, we are poisoning the earth, and that will perhaps take a millennium or more. But anyway, let's now I want to follow the share. I'm sorry, I have to.
Try using your arrow keys.
Yes, it doesn't work. So.
Or click the arrows in the bottom left on the slide. You hover over the bottom left, there might be arrows.
All right. Yes. Thank you. So ICAN is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. It's an international network that has today 652 partners in 107 countries, and I'm happy to say that World Beyond Wars is one of them. We won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for mainly for facilitating the negotiations that led in the United Nations that led to the acceptance of the of a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the TPNW treaty. This treaty entered into force in 2021 when 50 ratifications were in. Today, the treaty has 94 countries as signatories and 73 countries have ratified it. And we are, of course, aiming now for 100 signatories, and but already 94 is a majority, or more or less a majority of the countries in the world. The parties to this treaty are meeting more or less annually in state parties meeting. The next one will be in New York next March. Note the dates. If you are in New York during those days, please participate in one of the very many events that will be arranged around this state parties meeting. aimed at non-governmental organizations or activists in general. The new thing that ICAN brought to the discussion on nuclear disarmament was to emphasize the humanitarian consequences of nuclear war and the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons testing. In this, we had powerful allies in the International Committee of the Red Cross and certain governments, Norway at the beginning, and then Mexico and Austria especially. And this led to the introduction into the General Assembly at the United Nations of resolutions demanding that negotiations should start on agreeing to a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. This was not the first time such a thing was attempted. This international INES network that Al mentioned, that I was very active in and co-founder of, was part of an attempt to produce what was called a nuclear weapons convention, but that led to nowhere because we insisted then that the nuclear weapons countries should be included from the start. However, ICAN took a different route, encouraged by the success of the Ottawa Convention on Personal Mines and the Cluster Munitions Convention, where one should start with a coalition of the willing and then build up that into a general agreement. Now, what are these humanitarian consequences? We have to recognize, and this was especially recognized by the IPPNW, the Organization of Physicians, that the societal infrastructure in a nuclear war will be completely destroyed, and there is no hope that the victims can be looked after. There will be no hospitals, there will be no transportation, there will be no supplies. In a major nuclear war, we have to count with hundreds of millions of immediate casualties. But that is not all. A major nuclear war waged where a large number of nuclear weapons are exploded on targets with high fuel content will lead to huge fires, which will bring soot up into the higher levels of the atmosphere, which will block sunlight and lead to famines that will be completely will be lethal. One has estimated that if the United States and Russia would go to a full-scale war against each other, then practically everybody on the in the northern hemisphere will be will succumb to a famine because there will be no food produced for 10 years or so. In addition, large regions will be uninhabitable for centuries. Denote these time scales. You have these immediate casualties, that's in seconds. Then you have the nuclear winter, 10 years or more, and then centuries of nuclear fallout problems, leaving large regions uninhabitable. Nuclear war is also not gender doesn't treat genders equally. women or children are especially susceptible to damage from nuclear radiation. And the TPNW treaty is the first disarmament treaty that really takes this into account. And also, we have to there are already victims, apart from the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were rightly awarded with this year's Nobel Peace Prize. There are also victims from the 2000 nuclear tests that have been conducted over the years in various places. And the TPNW is also the first treaty to address the rights of these victims.
Klaus, if I could again just gently urge you to find a way in the next minute or two to finish up, what you very much want to share.
Okay, so the situation of nuclear disarmament today is the one that I briefly say here. Although the numbers of nuclear weapons have decreased from roughly 70,000 to now to 12,000 now, there is a qualitative rearmament going on in all nuclear powers. The existing agreements, mainly the non-proliferation treatment, has not shown any progress. The only agreement that many treatments are no longer in force. The only treatment that is in force is the New START agreement, but it expires in February 2026, and after that we have a free-for-all situation again. So this is, of course, a situation which we would not like to happen. And as far as ICAN is concerned, making the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, universal is the ultimate solution. So I'll end here then. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Klaus. It's frightening to think what could happen. So please continue with your work. And you're right, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons must be enacted worldwide and ratified by all the countries. It's insane what we're doing. Our last final speaker before we go then to questions and answers is Anna Gartagani. She is with the Justice Not Arms Samud, which is seeking to end the arms trade with Israel. Samud, by the way, is an Arabic word meaning steadfastness. Anna is originally Greek and recalls herself in civil actions since being a toddler with her parents, carried by her parents to demonstrations and political activities. She has been active in Greece through engineering trade unions, anti-fascist collectives, and in Finland mostly through the Finnish Red Cross and Samud, the Finnish Palestine Network, and her current focus is making Justice Not Arms campaign more accessible to supporters who want to engage in that advocacy work. So Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to the World Beyond War and everyone who has come here to listen to us. Thank you for the warm welcome. I wanted to add something that might be interesting given what I heard earlier from, I think it was Ahti, who mentioned that our Minister of Foreign Affairs is interested in having an anti-Semitism conference. I wanted to add that part of our campaign is made up of Nachlieli activists. Nachlieli is an organization of Jewish people who live in Finland and believe in the liberation of Palestine. So just for the record, I'm going to share my slides, if I can decide which ones they are. Okay, found them. And I hope this is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Nice. Okay, so this is a campaign that has launched recently, but before I talk about our campaign, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the background. So the arms trade between Finland and Israel is nothing new. It is something that has started already in 1950 from a company in Tampere, and it has been going on for those 74 years. The arms trade is very important to Israel. In fact, they have named Finland as one of the 6 countries that are their most important cooperators in arms trade. So it's particularly large and significant. It has been successfully depoliticized in Finland, even during the genocide. Export licenses for war products are usually granted by the Ministry of Defense and have to be in accordance with the treaties that Finland has signed. However, purchases are not. And that has been a very big issue because purchases don't go through necessarily the government, or if they do, there are political criteria for them. There's a quote here from the Minister of Defense, Antti Häkkänen, and he mentions that I know there is great oppositions to these acquisitions on the left. That's not true. There have been polls that show that 60% of the Finnish people disagree with what is happening right now in Palestine, and so he should listen to his own voters as well. The arms trade between Finland and Israel undermines the Finnish commitments to international human rights. It is, I'm sure, to everyone who is attending now, quite clear by now that the International Court of Justice has stated there is a plausible genocide right now happening. The ICC also has charged the Israeli Prime Minister and the former Minister of Defense with war crimes. So Finland should be stepping up and respecting our own treaties. Israel is proudly marketing their arms as field tested, which we know what it means in practice. In practice, it means that they have been shooting people who live in a concentration camp in Gaza. So they have been testing them on civilians for decades, and that is something that should not make Finland very proud to be part of. Finally, I wanted to say that it is substantial. Finland has made procurement decisions worth 400 million euros in between 2008 and 2021. Our organization has been researching this. There are many more. There are little bits and pieces of information that we're putting together, but the biggest one yet to come is David Sling. That has an initial cost of 316 million euros, but that is just for the system itself, because of course you never buy just the system itself anymore. You buy the software updates, and those are proprietary software updates, as we all can imagine. You buy additional options, you buy components, performance enhancements, missiles. Each one of those missiles is alone in itself 1 million euros. So this is a huge deal. The maintenance and the upgrades are going to tie Finland to Israeli arms trade for decades. There has been some previous work on the arms trade, particularly from an organization that might be known to some of you, ICAN. It's the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. It had a chapter until now in Finland, and there is a lot that has been done in the past. And there's also something which is current. It is a citizen initiative with the name, the Finnish name, Lakisärmään. It basically translates to Law on Point. They have a website that I invite you to visit. There's a full translation of this in their website. I should let our audience know that Finland has a legislation that if 50,000 citizens sign a legal initiative within a time frame of 6 months, that legal initiative will come to the parliament for discussion and can become law, Finnish law. This initiative proposes to regulate defense procurement in the same way that we regulate exports of weapons. Exports, as I said before, are already regulated, but unfortunately, imports are bought based on performance, price, security of supply. Those are the primary considerations, and there are some details here on the legal framework. I should say that the security of supply is again about the situation of Israel potentially becoming a pariah state that will not have the ability to supply either through an embargo or some other situation. And if we can't get the products that are needed to maintain the existing systems, that will be a problem for the Finnish defenses. So with all this short introduction, I'm coming to our campaign. Our campaign goals are to raise awareness on how the trade between Finland and Israel makes us complicit in the current genocide, to politicize the Finnish people on this issue, to pressure the state to end the arms trade. Here we can see a picture of our general commander of the Finnish Defense Forces, Vesa Virtanen, visiting Israel in September 2024. Here he's inspecting how David's sling works. He was there for 4 days and happily shook hands and posed for pictures with all the people of the Israeli occupying forces. This is, I mean, people in Finland might say he has to, because of his position, to make certain meetings and whatnot, but doing it happily and shaking in people's hands is, I think, up to him. We want to increase understanding of these decisions as political decisions, that they're not detached or neutral bureaucratic work. We want to influence different levels of society and demand the arms embargo with Israel. Some of our practical goals that we have is to make sure that the Finnish military is not dependent on Israeli companies, that even private companies, I'm going to name a few like Nokia or Nammo, Patria actually, because that's a Finnish company that supplies to Nammo in Norway, stop selling, buying, developing any military equipment with Israel. Israel should not be able to use the Finnish sale example for marketing purposes, which they do now, to lure in more customers. And our national campaigns, other national campaigns, should be able to use us as an example of why their own countries should not buy weapons from Israel. How we've been doing this until now.
If I could just
Yes.
gently interrupt you, so if you can find a way to
yes,
finish up. So
I'm in 9 minutes. I'm counting.
Okay.
Thank you. So our campaign visibility in the streets, demonstrations, info stands in public space, gathering signatures to support the citizens initiative, organizing events such as panel discussions, talking as guests like tonight, lobbying politicians through Sumud. There's a great information package for anybody who wants to use it in the Sumud webpage dedicated to our campaign, social media, etc. There are other things we've been trying to do but have not yet achieved. Reclaiming urban visibility. the media doesn't know we exist. We're invisible to the media for a year and a half now. We are hoping to be part of the local elections that are coming up very soon in Finland. We want to gather support from other organizations, unions. We want to organize a study circle and encourage petitions from all types of civil society, and maybe get somebody invited who can actually speak to the public about what is going on. Thank you. I'm going to finish here, and thank you for inviting me again.
Thank you very much, Anna. Your comments are very appropriate. We are often told by the military-industrial complex and military contractors that all these weapons and so on are good for our economies, and that's where they create so many jobs, when in fact, I think some of the people on the audience here have seen the research that shows that far more jobs would be created if governments and the public spent that money on education or healthcare or alternative energy. So those are the ways to expand the economy and create more jobs, not by producing weapons. So now we will begin the question and answer session. So Greta and Madonna, do I turn it over to you and take it over from here?
Yes. Okay. Okay. Our first question is, please comment on this idea and how it might be applied to nations you talk about today. The situation. There was a recent appointment of the first woman, Molly Burhans, to a Vatican department to identify lands belonging to the Catholic Church around the world. She is doing this to support environment protection. Could this apply to peace efforts? And then she gives her contact is through Goodlands, www.goodlands. Could this be a way to stop war activities in all parts of the world, declaring peace on religious land protections, especially if all major religions called for peace on their lands, including Orthodox Christians, Buddhists, Muslim, Catholic Christian lands in Europe, North and South America? This could include lands of universities and colleges owned and controlled by religious organizations. What do you think? Who wants to answer that?
Any of our speakers, feel free to just unmute and chime in.
Well, perhaps I could chime in, being a religious organization which does own property around the world. It's certainly something worth thinking about to start such a movement. There was such a movement around divestment from greenhouse gas emitting corporations causing climate crisis, and it was quite successful. I think the main value of it would be the unintended value that people would start thinking about and become mobilized, especially if this were done as an interfaith activity. There may be some churches or chapels that are located on military bases, and that might create some kind of conflicts. But I think it's still a worthwhile idea. I know the Finnish church, for instance, owns quite a large amount of forest, and I'm sure some of that forest is used by the military for training exercises. So it's certainly an idea that's worth thinking about, and one that I hadn't heard before. Thank you for suggesting.
Second question is, has the nuclear veto of the permanent members made the UNSC and the UNGA irrelevant to the very mission of the UN?
I can take that one. It's not just a nuclear veto. I mean, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which are not by accident, also the 5 countries that are allowed by the new non-proliferation treaty to possess nuclear weapons, their veto power has, as we all know, made the United Nations a rather ham-fisted organization to deal with serious conflicts. The General Assembly does not have any veto rules. Decisions are taken by simple majority, but they are not as binding as the decisions taken by the Security Council. There have been, or there are afoot, a number of proposals to reform the Security Council, to withdraw the veto right and to increase the representativeness of the Security Council by allowing, for instance, allowing countries from the south to become permanent members, or not to have permanent members at all, but only rotating members. And so let's hope that something comes out of these initiatives.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Which of the nuclear powers have or have not signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons?
Okay, that's again for me. No nuclear power or country possessing nuclear weapons is a state party to the treaty. The strategy so far, and let me add that several of them have issued more or less solemn statements saying that they will never become part of that treaty. But our strategy with the TPNW is to have, since it's part of international law now, to have this as a shaming effect on the nuclear powers and to put pressure on them to adopt a more reasonable policy in terms of nuclear weapons. But the simple answer to your question is none.
Okay, thank
And I
you.
see Ulla has a hand up. Ulla, go ahead.
Yes, and I think it's important also to add that no NATO country has signed and of course not ratified. And this is a shame because we had a President Urho Kekkonen who 3 times, if I remember right, suggested a nuclear-free zone in Northern Europe, and Olof Palme, who was murdered obviously by the CIA, he also suggested it. So it's a shame. I'm ashamed of the Finnish government.
Thank you for that. Okay. This is a question from, I'm an Iranian-American Sufi Muslim peace and climate change activist. You mentioned the beautiful Quaker principle of the radical religious tolerance even to Muslims. How can we help so that this moral principle evolves so that one day it would not be so radical in the civilized global north to accept, not just tolerate, Muslims as sisters and brothers in the family of humanity, so that Islamophobia is seen as the other side of the coin of anti-Semitism one day?
I could maybe say that I think that at the moment, at least in Finland, and I think I can speak for some of the Nordic countries, the Islamophobic is less than the Russophobic. So we are really now, all these things with weapons from Israel and so on, it's all said that we need it because we have this terrible neighbor who is going to attack us anytime. So it's easy to go through with weapons business, for instance. And I think that if you would make a opinion poll among the Finnish people in about Gaza, a clear majority is against Israel and pro peace in Gaza and a two-state system, which was Finland's government's also more or less stand on the issue for years. They said that there should be two states. But now, as a NATO member, we are like, you know, the three apes. We don't see, we don't hear, we don't talk. I mean our government.
Mm.
It's still the two-state solution is still the official line of Finland.
Yeah, but
and
they
as
don't
we
do
have
anything.
waited in the United Nations for that.
Yes, but they don't do anything to push it. That's the problem.
Could I just chime in on this? Even Muslims should be tolerated. That was an initiative that back in the 1650s, a long time ago, when I think the Turks were at the gates of Vietnam, places like that, and or if they were thought Muslims were thought about at all. So at that time it was progressive, but perhaps now might not be considered so. I just wanted to mention, because I'm involved in the UN Anti-Racism Day event organizing here, that Islamophobia is part of the UN treaty against the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination ever since the Durban Conference. It's part of the UN Anti-Racism Convention, which is a legal document, and you can complain to the administrative committee, which executes that treaty on these issues once you've exhausted the national remedies.
Okay, thank you. We have time for Liisa commented that Finland was surprised by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What was the Finnish view of the claims that NATO had been provoking Russia for decades?
Can you
Liisa,
put the question once more?
okay. Liisa commented that Finland was surprised by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What was the Finnish view of the claims that NATO had been provoking Russia for decades?
Yes, NATO
Well,
had been provoking Russia for decades because
yes,
when the Berlin Wall fell, all the Western leaders with Baker, Foreign Minister Baker from the United States and Genscher and whoever they were promising Gorbachev unofficially, but it has been taped, that NATO would not go 1 inch eastwards. And what happened? After the 90s, all the former Czechia, Slovakia, Poland, etc., they rushed into NATO. And of course, that was something that made Russia a bit disappointed, if not even a bit angry. And the ones who are interested in how the whole Ukraine business started should go in and read about the coup that was made to overthrow the democratically elected president in Ukraine, and they put this marionette, US NATO marionette instead. And if you think that Russia now cannot even properly use the Baltic Sea with all these US bases and NATO troops, and that they even then would take the whole Black Sea, that's of course something for Russia to be really worried about. So I think, and if you say this to the Finnish public, they say that, oh, Ulla, you are such a Putin lover. That has nothing to do with Putin. It has to do with a big country that, of course, they dissolved the Warsaw Pact when the Berlin Wall fell. Why wasn't NATO dissolved? Because NATO and Warsaw were counter parts. And when one is dissolved, the other one should be dissolved. And instead, NATO goes on with big shoes and getting everybody in. And I would say that the Ukraine war was the last puzzle piece in US play to get Finland and Sweden into NATO. Because we had a 70% majority against NATO up till the day when the Ukraine war started. So I don't know, but I think we have to really consider what is going on behind our backs.
Sorry. And yes, of course, officially, the foreign policy says that Baltic countries and all other countries that joined NATO, they are independent countries and they can choose what they do. That's the explanation. And but still, of course, I think that there were people who really knew that Russia will attack, but for most of the people, it was still a shock and unexpected. I don't know. For me, it was a shock. I felt myself so stupid.
Yes, for the common people, it was unexpected, but I don't think it was for the political elite.
Yes, those who are there.
Okay. Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think we can squeeze in a few more questions.
Okay, there's a couple of them that are related to the military-industrial complex. The question is, it feels like weapons manufacturers control the world with people in power directly profiting from arms sales and other quid pro quo dealings. So what can we do? Would a conference be enough to counterbalance the power of weapons manufacturers?
Weapons manufacturers are the most powerful industry in the world. They play their own game. You have here in Finland the education minister. His wife is involved in selling, I think it is aluminium, to Russia, even if we have sanctions. I don't know if aluminium is certainly also used in the military business, but you see how they deal. They make decisions about sanctions, and then the ministers or their wives or their husbands can go on doing business. Kaja Kallas, who was prime minister in Estonia, and now one of the commissioners in the European Commission, her husband is doing business with Russia, even if we have sanctions. And why? They are totally corrupted. They should have to resign when such things happens. Maybe before they would have resigned. Today it's a practical joke, more or less.
I see Anna has a hand up and then Klaus.
Thank you. It used to be that it used to be common sense that those industries existed to supply existing wars, but unfortunately now it seems to be the case that we're manufacturing wars to keep the industries up. And one of my biggest issues is not just the wars. This technology that is being manufactured with the pretext of the wars is also going to be used in civil society. So we have seen the militarization of the police in many countries, and this is coming to every society. This is coming to Finland as well. when there is face recognition or all kinds of new technology that is first tested on Palestinians, unfortunately, or other war situations, then police departments and other forces buy it. And this might be the case in Finland as well, which is where we want to involve the local elections in. And then it can be used for control of civil disobedience or something like that. So it's a larger problem than just the war. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and Klaus?
I'm not proposing any global or major solution, but what everyone can do is, for instance, the following. You can pressure your own bank not to invest in military technology in companies that produce weapons, especially weapons of mass destructions. I can, I mentioned in the chat the ICAN's annual report, Don't Bank on the Bomb, that lists all the companies that participate in manufacturing nuclear weapons or components of nuclear weapons. And you can actually demand that your bank does not invest in those companies. I actually managed to do it myself for my own bank. They took off Raytheon Limited from their investment lists, and you can do similar things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Liisa has a hand up.
Yes, I saw that Al was asking me to tell about the DC tales about the environmental question and about who will pay what. And so I opened the agreement, and in its Article 27, it's called Environment, Public Health and Safety. There is a half a page, such a small text, and somehow I cannot get the clue in it, but maybe I think that my English is not good enough to really understand, because all these legal texts and agreement texts are written in their own way, and but there's I think that very round and about what about and nothing, not really concrete about it. That's what I can say. As I said that, for instance, when these fighters are doing the exercises for during the 1 hour when they are flying and in a fast speed, the greenhouse gas emissions are enormous, and there's no mention about it, and things like that. They said that like more about how the environment, so that the environmental issues must not harm public health and safety, and things like that. It's very short. That's all I can say. Yes.
Thank you for
Thank
that
you.
answer, Liisa.
All right, well, I think we're just about out of time, and I thank you so much, Madonna, for facilitating the Q&A, and thank you to all of our speakers for this informative event. So I'll pass it back to Al to give us the closing words.
Thanks to all of you for joining in on this important event, and thanks especially for the speakers and all of the material that they presented to us. And I hope that this conference that Ahti and others have talked about in Helsinki will occur next summer, because my wife and I have our plane reservations already made for to visit Finland again about that time. Thanks to everyone and for everything that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll send out an email with the recording and the slides and other resources. We really appreciate all of your efforts and we look forward to collaborating further together. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.